October 12th, 1492. The Caribbean Sea lies calm beneath a blazing sun. The water shimmers like molten sapphire, and the humid air is heavy with the scent of salt and wild orchids. On a small Bahamian island, the Taino people are preparing for another ordinary day, fishing, gathering fruits, teaching children the old stories of their ancestors. And then, on the horizon, something strange appears. 3 enormous wooden shades crowned with pale, swollen sails crawl slowly toward the shore. At first, the Taino believe these are floating spirits, or perhaps the gods themselves. Children point and laugh. Elders stand in silence, uneasy. No one here has ever seen anything like this. On board the largest ship, the Santa Maria, a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus leans over the railing. His hands are blistered from months at sea, his beard wild and sunburned. He whispers to himself, "India. We've reached the Indies." But he's wrong. He hasn't found Asia. He has stumbled upon an entirely unknown continent, a world that Europe never imagined, rich with cultures, languages, and beliefs older than Rome itself. The men disembark cautiously, armed with steel swords and crucifixes. The Taino approach, curious, offering gifts of cotton and food. Columbus writes in his journal that they are gentle, generous, and trusting. Yet he also notes, chillingly, that they would make excellent servants. And so begins the chain of events that will reshape the planet. Spain claims these islands in the name of Ferdinand and Isabella. But what lies beyond draws them deeper. Vast lands to the west, teeming with unimaginable riches. Rumors spread across Europe of golden empires, strange animals, and rivers lined with pearls. Soon fleets of Spanish ships swarm the Atlantic, hungry for wealth and glory. But the New World is not empty. Here live tens of millions of people, from the powerful Aztec empire of Tenochtitlan to the vast Incan roads winding through the Andes, to countless smaller nations, each with its own gods, laws, and traditions. For them, this is home. The collision is inevitable. Steel meets obsidian, cross meets sun god, faith meets faith. And in the shadows, silent killers travel faster than ships, smallpox, measles, and influenza. Diseases unknown to the Americas, carried unknowingly by the Europeans. Within decades, entire populations will vanish. Yet on this very first day, no one knows the scale of what is coming. The Taino greet their visitors with open. By 1493, Columbus returns to the Caribbean, but this time he is not alone. Behind him sails a fleet of 17 ships, carrying over 1,200 men. Soldiers, priests, settlers, and adventurers. They are not here to explore anymore, they are here to conquer. On the islands of Hispaniola and Cuba, wooden crosses rise above palm trees. Churches are built from coral stone, and Spanish flags flutter in the warm wind. But beneath the hymns and prayers, another sound echoes. The clash of steel, the cry of men, the weeping of families torn apart. The Taino people, once curious and welcoming, soon realize the truth. This is no meeting of equals. The Spanish demand tribute, gold, pearls, cotton. For every village, for every family, a quota is imposed. Those who cannot pay are punished. Hands are cut off. Children are taken. Communities begin to vanish. Columbus writes proudly to Ferdinand and Isabella, "There are many slaves to be had here." And so begins one of the darkest chapters of the so-called Age of Discovery. Men, women, and even children are forced to mine gold in sweltering heat, while strange European diseases spread like fire. Within just a few decades, the once thriving Taino population of millions is reduced to a few thousand souls. Yet, even amidst this devastation, stories of resistance rise. A young Taino leader named Hatuey gathers his people deep in the forests of Cuba. Standing barefoot by the fire, he speaks. These men worship gold as their god. If we die, let us die free. Hatuey leads raids against Spanish outposts, burning villages and sinking small boats, but in 1512 he is captured and tied to a stake. A priest offers him baptism before death, promising entry to heaven. Hatuey asks, "Are there Spaniards in heaven?" "Yes," the priest replies. "Then I choose hell." The flames rise. His legend is born. Meanwhile, in Europe, news spreads like wildfire. Pamphlets speak of a new world filled with endless treasures. Farmers, merchants, and desperate men dream of gold and freedom. More ships set sail from Seville, Cadiz, Lisbon, until the Caribbean becomes a battlefield of empires. Priests arrive too, led by men like Bartolomé de las Casas, who at first owns slaves himself, then becomes their fiercest defender. He writes horrified, "This was the most unjust, cruel, and detestable thing that has ever been seen." But his words cannot stop the tide. Spain's hunger grows. Explorers push inland, seeking cities of gold, whispered about by native traders, and soon the Caribbean will become only the gateway, the beginning. As the 16th century dawned, the Spanish crown stood at the threshold of immense power, yet it faced a challenge unlike any before. The discovery of the New World was no longer just a tale whispered in courts. It had become an imperial mission. Across the Atlantic, lands stretched endlessly, filled with resources, peoples, and mysteries Europeans had never imagined. In Seville, ships were built and loaded with supplies, while young men from impoverished noble families flocked to sign their names as conquistadors. For many, this was not just a voyage, it was salvation. Spain was still healing from centuries of war with the Moors, and thousands of soldiers were now left unemployed. The Americas offered wealth, purpose, and redemption. The Catholic Church quickly entwined itself with the mission. The Pope had granted Spain authority over vast territories, declaring the conversion of native peoples a divine duty. But behind sermons and blessings lay another truth: gold. Rumors spread of empires across the ocean, rich beyond imagination. Gold became not only a symbol of faith, but of dominance. Yet even before Cortés and Pizarro, whose names would later echo through history, Spain faced the daunting challenge of survival. Vast storms swallowed fleets whole. Diseases struck down crews before they reached land. The journey across the Atlantic took months, and the spectre of mutiny haunted every expedition. Still, ambition outweighed fear. By the 1510s, small settlements clung to the Caribbean coasts, fragile outposts surrounded by an alien world. Native peoples watched cautiously, some trading food and water, others preparing their warriors. Neither side yet understood the full scale of what was coming. Europe's hunger for dominance, Spain's faith-driven zeal, and individual dreams of glory fused into one unstoppable force. Soon, the Caribbean would become the launch pad for campaigns that would forever change the Americas and the world. By the 1520s, Spain's fragile foothold in the Caribbean had grown into a network of settlements and ports. From Hispaniola to Cuba and Puerto Rico, each outpost served as a stepping stone for the expeditions that would soon reach the American mainland. But the Spanish were not alone in these new lands, and their arrival was far from welcome. For the indigenous peoples, the first encounters with Europeans were a strange blend of curiosity and dread. The sight of armored men, towering horses, and weapons that roared like thunder must have seemed otherworldly. Some tribes approached with offerings, seeking alliances. Others, wary of these pale newcomers, withdrew into forests and mountains. The Spanish, meanwhile, were driven by two unshakable beliefs: their divine right to rule and their hunger for wealth. Crosses were planted on shores as symbols of faith, but just beyond them, conquistadors searched rivers and hills for gold. At first, small exchanges took place: glass beads for food, iron tools for furs, but misunderstandings were inevitable. A single misstep could turn a fragile peace into bloodshed. In some villages, Spanish demands for labor and tribute were met with silent resentment, while others resisted openly, attacking small garrisons and caravans. Retaliation was swift and brutal. Entire communities were burned, leaders executed, and survivors enslaved under the newly imposed encomienda system. At the same time, invisible enemies swept through the land. Diseases carried unknowingly by Europeans, smallpox, measles, influenza, began to devastate native populations, leaving villages eerily silent. To the Spanish, this was often seen as divine favor, reinforcing their belief that God had chosen them to conquer and convert. Yet beneath the growing dominance of Spain lay the seeds of its own challenges. The crown struggled to control ambitious captains whose loyalty wavered the further they sailed from Seville. Rivalry simmered between governors, conquistadors, and clergy, each vying for influence in this vast, untamed world. By the mid-1520s, whispers of unimaginable wealth reached the Caribbean, tales of mighty empires inland ruled by kings draped in gold. For Spain, this was the promise of ultimate glory. For the native peoples, it marked the beginning of an era of upheaval unlike anything they had ever known. Soon, the stage would be set for a clash that would shake the foundations of two worlds and forge the history of the Americas in fire and blood. The dawn of the 16th century marked the irreversible transformation of two worlds that had never before touched. Across the Atlantic, Europe's gaze sharpened. Kings and merchants smelled the promise of wealth, faith, and power. For the Spanish crown, the Caribbean islands became stepping stones, launching pads for expeditions deeper into unknown continents. For the Portuguese, a secretive rivalry brewed, dividing the oceans through treaties written in ink but carved into blood. By the 1520s, fleets no longer carried mere explorers. They brought soldiers, priests, engineers, and diseases unseen by the people of the Americas. On the shores of the Caribbean and the Gulf, wooden crosses rose beside fortified ports, marking the first colonial footholds. Gold flowed back to Seville. Silver soon followed from the mines of the Andes, and Europe's hunger only deepened. But behind the glitter of precious metals lay a darker truth. Entire populations withered under the weight of forced labor, unfamiliar sickness, and a faith imposed by sword and sermon. Yet, the tide of change spread beyond Spanish dominion. France cast its nets along the northern coasts, sending trappers and settlers into cold forests, where they bartered with native nations for furs more valuable than gold. England, watching the riches of Iberia swell, made its first hesitant claims on the edge of an untamed continent. Farther north, the Dutch dreamed of trade routes and free ports, sharpening a competition that would soon span oceans. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the Old World itself began to shift. Foods once unknown in Europe, potatoes, tomatoes, corn, cacao, crossed the sea and rewrote the tables of kings and peasants alike. New species, new economies,